Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Maris Kreizman, and thank you. And before we begin, I would like to let you know that books by these wonderful authors can be purchased from Greenlight Bookstore over to the right. The authors will be signing their books immediately following this program at the signing table next to the stage. At the conclusion of the, okay, nope. So let me introduce these wonderful people for a panel called This Modern Life, which I almost felt like I was going to start by just gesturing and being like, but anyhow, Brandon Taylor is the author of the novels Real Life and The Late Americans. He lives in New York. Sarah Rose Etter is the author of Ripe and the Book of X, winner of the 2019 Shirley Jackson Award. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Time, Guernica, Bomb, Gulf Coast, and many more. And Martin Riker is the co-founder and publisher of the feminist press Dorothy, a publishing project, and the author of The Guest Lecture and Samuel Johnson's Eternal Return. Look at this crew. So I was hoping we could start by just, if you read just a little bit, just so everybody can get a taste of what you've done and will want to buy your book afterwards, obviously. So Brandon, would you like to go first?
Should I move this? I don't. Hi, everybody. Thrilled to be here. I am going to read from The Late Americans. You don't need to know much except that the passage I'm reading is in the voice of a very cranky and annoyed poet who thinks that MFAs are scams. What's that? Oh, thanks. On the river trail, they passed the modernist galleries, which housed various exhibits and shows. The previous fall, Seamus and Oliver had gone to a talk on race and the poetry of John Berryman in one of the galleries. Some of their classmates had been there too, Garza, Linda, Ingrid. During the talk, the speaker, who was white, had used the word nigger while quoting a source. It seemed to come out without her knowing it, but the room noticed and then grew cold and quite hot. Seamus felt a frisson of glee. The talk up to that point had been tedious, mainly because he agreed with it all. Racism bad, Berryman good, but also bad re-race. White people talking about racism had the effect of a news report, but here was theater. For days after the incident got retold and reconfigured, Linda ended up on the local news recounting the violence that had befallen her at this talk, and the speaker was put on leave in the lit department and then asked not to return to her post in the spring. She made the mistake of writing a long article about it for The Guardian, which Linda shared on Twitter and mocked. It turned into an ugly mess on culture blogs and Instagram, and now Linda was verified on social media, and the speaker was an occasional guest columnist for the New York Times on matters of cancel culture, which was not real, except that sometimes it kind of was.
Sarah.
All right. Brandon, that was great.
Oh, thanks.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out this hot mic. How's everybody doing today? Okay, yeah, let's get some vibes going here, huh? So you don't need to know much other than my narrator is sad and she's about to go to work. I am my mother in the mirror beneath the yellow light of the office bathroom, dark half moons beneath my eyes, pores large as buckets, lips a thin, grim line. I work with what I have. I fluff my limp drugstore auburn hair, wipe away the smudged black mascara from beneath my flat brown eyes, pinch my cheeks, and bite my lips until they redden so there's life in my face. If I just keep making adjustments, eventually I will be beautiful. Morning, someone says. She appears in the mirror next to me, younger, blonde hair, bright blue eyes, glowing tan, the next generation of tech, the embodiment of the valley, radiating probiotics and spirulina. I don't know how to pronounce that because I don't know what it is. Her name is Kat or Julie or Jennifer or Lindsay. I can never keep the new girls from sales team straight. My fake self slides over me like a mask. Good morning, I say. Love your dress, she chirps back. I give her outfit a quick once-over, a gray woven t-shirt with the company logo, raw denim jeans, and mint green sneakers which are sustainable or tied to a charity. They are likely saving a tree in the rainforest right now because of her shoes. Oh my God, it's from forever ago. Thank you, though, I say, right on cue. I love your shoes. Thank you. Oh my God, I know you won't believe this, but they're made from recycled soda cans, so it's like, yes, they're stylish, but also we're doing something good. Totally, you have to do something good. Her existence underscores all of my flaws, my flabby stomach, wide nose, all of me revealed as uneven in the face of her flat stomach, full lips, bright eyes, perfect symmetry. How is your day going, she asks. I pause. It's not even 8 a.m., and my day has only just begun. This is a trick question. She is coming at me from every angle. I am under siege, in a war. The enemy is attacking at dawn. Honestly, great, I say. So many meetings, big day. I worry my breath stinks. Can she smell it? Same here, she says. Such a big day. Getting in early to get out ahead of it, girl. Girl, same, I say. It's so worth it. We're so lucky. I know, she says. Totally worth it. We're the luckiest. See you out there, and vanishes from the frame. My shoulders go limp from the exertion of my performance. The mirror and the double sinks and the stalls and the table and the toiletries warp as if I'm inside a looking glass. 10 hours of work stretch out ahead of me. I feel the pressure against my skin. I must not make a single mistake. Thanks.
Thanks for mentioning Dorothy. Shamelessly plugging that we have a table here, 105. It's really far that way.
Woo, so go buy their books.
Please feel free to come up there. All you need to know is my book, it takes place in the head of a woman who can't sleep, and she's kind of telling herself her life, and I'm going to read a dream that she had years ago, and she's remembering this dream. It's a recurring dream she had when her friend Evelyn died. So total come down from
It sounds like an upper to me.
your thing. A dark basement, cinder block walls, and there's a door here, blue. A blue door frame wedged roughly into the wall, sloppily caulked into the cinder blocks. Push open the door, and the room beyond is just a space, a mouth I can't see at all. I walk through the doorway, and the effect is like holding down the brightness button on a dark computer screen. There's nothing, and then suddenly light rushes in. I see that this side of the basement is painted entirely black, even the floor and ceiling, with black painted pipes running into and out of the walls and clanking noises. Evelyn is standing in front of me, her hand extended toward me. In the dream, I know that she's dead. The light is natural light, not light bulb light. From a window along the ceiling over Evelyn's left shoulder, the black walls and pipes look a little glossy. The black paint reflects the light, but the black of the ceiling and the floor swallows the light, as if there's nothing there but empty space. Then I realize that Evelyn's hand is not extended to me, but is pointing past me to the floor. I turn, and lying dead on the floor behind me is a large white dog. It is not a particular breed, just large and white. It looks stiff. I don't approach it. A sentence comes into my head, the same words every time. A white dog lies dead on the floor of a black basement. I turn back to Evelyn, and she's still facing me. She mouths some words, though no sounds come out, but I understand the words anyway. Sometimes the words are, "That's me," and sometimes, "I'm dead." Those are the only two things she ever says, either one or the other. But the moment she speaks these words, panic pours into my body like water from a pitcher, quickly filling up my feet, my legs, then my torso and arms, my neck, all the way to the top of my head. I find myself suffocating inside my own body. But I am also, while this is happening, calm. Because in the dream, I know that this is me now, forever, this feeling. A white dog lies dead on the floor of a black basement. I will live inside this feeling forever. So.
I think this is your reminder to take your antidepressants if you didn't already take them today.
The dead dog part, Marty. Right here.
It was 2 minutes long.
So I wanted to start with a thread that I have noticed that goes through all of your novels. And yes, part of it is take your antidepressants, find your son, whatever it is. But in Marty's book about an economist prepping to give a lecture on John Maynard Keynes. And Brandon's book about struggling artists and many other struggling people in a college town. And in Sarah's book, in which her main character works in tech, and she encounters both immense wealth and an ever-growing number of unhoused people. I would like you to tell me about writing fiction set in late capitalism. Just an easy one, too.
Oh my
A
God.
softball. Let's kick it off.
I think people write whole books about that, Maris. I think there are entire books on that subject. I don't know that I mean, part of the title of The Late Americans, it very much comes from this seemingly pervasive idea of lateness that is in culture now. And it also comes from the sense of like living in America today feels like you're late to a party that's been over for a long time, but the lights are still on and there's like really gross like guacamole like in the bowl on the table of our lives. And so I mean I think it would have felt very dishonest to try to write about contemporary life that wasn't in some way like shaped or touched by, you know, the gig economy or by the fact that as artists you're like you have to work a job in order to support yourself in order to like make art, but of course that job strips you of your energy, your time, and so you actually have no time for yourself. Like there's no part of our lives that hasn't been invaded by capitalism or by the impulse to commodify. And as an artist I find those conditions really interesting, although I do wish that I had other conditions to write about. I feel like it'd be really great to write about like Belle Epoque, France. Like, that would have been a really nice era to have written about. But yeah, I feel like if you're writing today, you're kind of writing about lives that exist in the shadow of capitalism, and there's really no escaping it in some way.
I think they're looking at you.
I'm looking at both of you. Whoever would like to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always was writing surreal work before this book, and it was never really set in a place or a time. And so when I decided to write about San Francisco, obviously it had to become very much about a place and a time. And so some of this was going through news articles from that time and thinking about what actual protests were happening, what sorts of things were bearing down on everyone at the time. And I did really want it to feel like the feeling you get when you scroll your phone and you see something horrifying and you feel like you're the only one having that feeling, but actually everyone is having that feeling. That's kind of what I wanted the whole book to be. And it's hard to talk about late capitalism because I was asking earlier, when are we going to be in post-late capitalism? Although I don't know what that means or why I just said it. But isn't what this is for me to just say words strung together? No, but I mean, it infiltrates every part of our lives. I have a full-time job and I still write, and every day I wake up and see something horrible that will impact me or my friends in a horrible way. And so, yeah, to go back to what Brandon said, actually, there is an issue of emotional honesty that I think has to be in fiction, especially right now. And, you know, everyone is always like, is this a real book? Is this about a real company? And I'm like, fuck if it's about a real company. Like, this is just what's going on. Like, it doesn't matter if it's about a specific company. It's about our world. So, yeah, I think all of us are sort of horrified and asking a lot of the same questions.
Yeah. Now, what I maybe can add, because obviously I agree with lots of what's been said already. Traditionally, as a reader, I haven't been that interested in books that dealt with the idea of dealing with topical subject matters. It just hasn't mattered to me. I always felt like if you live in the world and you're responsible to your own experience, then you are contemporary, no matter what you're writing about. Which might be a surprise to anyone who's read my book, because it's like a news feed of topical subject matter, and which was weird for me because it's not the kind of book I thought I would write, but it was what the book needed. And the way that I sort of thought it through was that I wasn't writing about the topical subject matter is not what I was writing. I was writing the experience of a character living in that subject matter. And I think that's really important for me, that if I was like telling you what I think about, you know, the Trump administration or something, you'd just probably agree with me. I mean, there's not a lot of room there for nuance.
Gonna scratch that question then.
Yeah, but if thanks. But to write about what I mentioned the Trump administration only because that's when this book was sort of conceived. I was trying to write about feeling like everything was unstable and everything was scary, and that it was unavoidable that the world's topical things came in, but at the same time, it would not have been an interesting book if it wasn't really about the feeling of living amongst that information.
Yeah.
I think you actually bring up an interesting point. Like, if you're going to write a book that's set in America within the last 3 years, or even back to when you wrote your time frame, you have to put these things in, or it's just bullshit. You know, what am I going to write about? Like, I have a rich lady who goes to a PTA meeting. No offense if you're out there and you're rich and you're at the PTA meeting. I do have books for sale, so I'm not trying to offend you. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to be honest about the time we're living in, then yeah, this is what it's going to look like, I guess.
And so I wonder, as fiction writers who are addressing modern times, are there places you won't go? I'll give you some examples. Well, Trump. I've read a lot of nonfiction in which he's referred to as like when that guy got elected in 2016. And, you know, the power of his name is sometimes just too much, can derail. Or like the pandemic. What do you do with it narratively?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about what things you do and don't want to address in our modern time.
Yeah, with a pandemic as a framing device in this book, but I do not want to write a pandemic book. I'm over it. I don't ever want to hear the word pandemic again. Bless you. If you wrote a book about the pandemic, I love you, but I just don't want to do it. I'm tired. What about you guys?
I think for me the key word there is the about. Like that about is a very heavy word. Like a book about the pandemic, I don't know that I would want to write that, but a book I'm working on right now is set in New York in 2022, and to sort of go back to something you said, Sarah Rose, which is that when you're writing about a time and a place, like there are certain historical things that must enter into it in a way, and so in writing about New York in 2022, like that New York had been through a pandemic, and so it's finding ways to ask more interesting questions about how that event impacted these characters' lives, and we're sort of catching them downstream of that. And so, like, that's how I'm choosing to sort of start to work on these more recent things. But for me, when something happens in the world, my first impulse is, like, never writing about that. Nope, never doing that. That's so tacky. But I think as time goes on and I get a little more distance, then I start to look back and write about it. So with this book, with The Late Americans, there's a long set of meditations on the 2008 financial crisis, which was not something that I thought I had any interest in, and I certainly didn't have any interest in it when it was happening on the news when I had just graduated from high school. But then during the pandemic, I started watching all these like really long form documentaries on the financial crisis, and I'm like, this is the most interesting thing in the world. Why doesn't someone write about this? And so I think, you know, distance plays a role in it for me. When I feel like I finally have an interesting take on it, that's when I want to like start to let it into the fiction.
I like what you said about it not being about a thing too, because it's almost like I think both of us are interested in the before or after of the big thing versus like looking at directly the big thing. It's the aftermath or it's life before, you know? I'm done saying words about that now. It's your turn.
I think for me, I actually have to back into the subject matter. Like for this book came out of my desire to write a book about someone who can't sleep, and that was it. You know, and then it became a book about academia and about economics and about various sort of feminist stuff, and it was all driven by the character. And so I guess I didn't set out to write about subject matters, but I sort of backed into them out of character, and maybe that is kind of in line with what you're saying. Like, if I set out to write about a subject matter, then the question would be, how do I make this interesting?
Yeah.
Which is already an uninteresting question.
Totally.
Yeah.
And on that note, another common theme in all of your novels is, I believe I asked you about this, Sarah, when you did my podcast. Just tell me about dread. Dread just permeates everything. And now I have 3 authors I can ask that question.
I think that's you first.
Me? Oh dear. I feel like dread is my home country. It feels like in many ways, it feels like my native context. And so when I'm writing, I think dread pervades a lot of my writing because I am feeling dread at all times. I am a radio that is tuned to that station always. And so for me, the challenge is actually not looking for ways to integrate dread, but to sort of taking dread as a base note, finding ways to let other things in, like happiness and joy, and to start to use dread as a complicating factor and not just like this flattening thing. Because I think, we've all read things that are so suffused with dread that it just flattens everything, including the plot and the characters, and it can start to feel hopeless, and it can start to feel really bleak, and nobody wants to read like a bleak book. I mean, I do, but I am atypical in many ways. And so for me, I think dread is in society today if you have a certain kind of outlook. And so it becomes important also as the author, though, to have a more capacious view of the world so that the dread is working in concert with other modalities, because life isn't just dread. Like there are children playing here today, and also people gossiping about publishing world. Like life is always everything at the same time. And as a writer, I feel like my challenge is to remember that and to like let it into the work sometimes.
I love what you said about that, because it is like as much suffering as it is joy, even though it's very easy to get caught up in the suffering. But yeah, I think we all feel dread a lot of the time. Like I was in a hotel room before I came here today, and I was like, I don't want to leave here. I think I should just stay in here. Like, what was I dreading? That we were gonna like sit on a nice stage in beautiful weather and talk about capitalism? Like it's like nothing scary is happening here. But so I do think part of it is trying to figure out why dread shows up and analyze it a little and get to the bottom of it as a human condition. But I do like what you said about balancing that out. A lot of the times in my work, that takes the form of white space or lists of facts so the reader can get a break from all the sadness, because I think there's a really good Maggie Nelson book called The Art of Cruelty that talks a bit about how cruel a work of art can be before you stop getting an impact from it, right? And so I think that's true also of like sad books and dread and depression in books. At some point it's so bleak that it can't function as a work of art because it's just too sad. And so you do have to start looking for ways to let the light in a little bit.
I can only answer with respect to my own book. So my own book, I was really interested in dread. I actually, not a lot happens in my book. A woman lies in bed and looks at the ceiling and thinks.
Okay, queen.
I was interested in the idea of a movement back and forth between the kind of positive imagination that like takes the experiences of your life and through creative means makes them into something that you can actually feel optimistic about, and the negative imagination, which is the one that sort of takes over your mind at 3 a.m. and makes everything full of dread. And so seeing it as a kind of a dialectic between those two things is the essential movement of the book. And it ends up being, I don't think either optimistic or pessimistic. It's more like the struggle of those two types of imagination. Because I think of dread as not a thing, but like as a form of imagination.
Yeah.
And it also strikes me that like all literature is about dread, right? Like all of our great works, aren't they just dreading everything? Is that true?
I mean, all the ones I like, but
Yeah,
again,
if anyone out there knows about a happy book, please come let me know at the signing table. I'll be right over there.
It's hard to talk about capitalism and dread without talking about complicity. And I do feel like all 3 of your books have characters who kind of either question their place in the process of things, or have other people, in Brandon's case, question them.
I didn't actually hear the question.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
complicity.
Complicity with the culture?
Yes.
Somebody else can answer that first.
All right, I'll go. I've had to answer this one a lot, so I can just get those answers that I said before and say. I'm just kidding. It's hard for me to align complicity with somebody who also needs to make money in order to survive. You could probably call my character complicit in capitalism, but she also knows she'll lose her apartment. She'll lose her whole life if she doesn't continue to have a paycheck. And so I get a little antsy about complicity when someone's livelihood is on the line because you don't really have as much of a choice as you might think you do. So yeah, that's my thought on complicity. It's hard for me to talk about it if it's not separate from making enough money to live, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that makes capitalism like dramatically interesting to me is very much the stickiness of it, which is that it's so good at like co-opting you into its machinations. And so like on the one level you are complicit in the sort of perpetuation of these systems, but on the other hand, if you don't give the machine what it wants, it will grind you up into dust. Like it will turn you into fertilizer. And like we all live, and that's one of the sort of, that's why I think many books that deal in themes of capitalism ultimately come back to questions of agency and questions of passivity, because capitalism is like really good at making you passive but telling you that you have agency. It's like, why? What do you mean? There are so many jobs you could have that you could do, and if you don't do them, like, yeah, you won't be able to feed your children, and your grandmother will get sick, and you can't. And if you get cancer, it's over for you forever. But like, you can get a job, and that's so great.
I mean, like working full time and publishing is largely because I need health care, because I have a pre-existing condition. So whenever someone's like, just write full time, it's like, well, I actually need health care, and why don't we talk about that too? Like, it's very hard to leave a job if you know that if anything happens to you, you're going to be financially ruined. And until we start addressing some of that stuff, it's very hard to separate from that at all, you know?
Yeah. And it, to me, like, part of what makes that narratively interesting, because it's the same thing as what the Greeks used to call fate. Like, capitalism is fate, unfortunately. And I find that, like, really enriching. Like, I feel like the great narrative conundrums of our time deal in capitalism for this very reason, because it is this sort of like broader constraining cultural force, and you know that what we used to just call that the gods rolling the dice. But now it's Bill Gates.
I was gonna say they all do have statues somewhere, so it's kind of the same shit, right? Isn't there a statue of Bill Gates somewhere?
Yeah.
He's definitely dead,
Yeah.
right?
Sarah.
I just forget who's dead all the time. Anytime, if you told me he was alive, I'd be like, sure.
I guess the only thing I can add is to that obvious, observation. It's really interesting when you're dealing with capitalism as a subject matter, and then maybe this gets back to what you're talking about, sort of everything's sort of co-opted. There's nothing new to say. And complicity is in that category too. There's nobody who doesn't understand the problem of complicity. It's an anxiety that just exists within the framework of capitalism. And so I think every writer comes to an answer of how do I make that new and interesting in a different way every time, right? But it is like, that's a narrative problem. It's like capitalism's a narrative problem in large part because everybody knows all of it already, And so as a writer, figuring out how to sort of get some juice out of that still, I think is pretty.
Can I bring up a hopeful thing? I'm gonna buck the trend, and
Please,
I think you're gonna
it.
love this because it does involve the French. I do love how much striking we're seeing, and I think the French have always been striking all the time, and I always was jealous of them because they were like burning down McDonald's and like laying down on the train tracks if even the government was like, you have to work 3 more days before you can retire. They're like, absolutely not. No one's going to work. We're done with this. And so I do feel a little bit of hope in seeing more of that organization and more of people demanding more for themselves. So that does give me a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
And it's not complicity. You know what I mean? That's like.
Yeah, it's this sort of like, it is this sort of this like great narrative interruption, this sort of disruption of the status quo. Obviously, not to explain what a strike is. But this summer, I recently read the novel Germinal, which is about a miners' strike. And I read that as the strikes in LA were beginning and as the strikes that were sweeping the nation were sort of picking up steam. And what I realized was like, oh yeah, Zola has like captured this like great narrative tension between Like, it's like the great anti-capitalist novel that then, of course, became a massive bestseller. And it's like, that's what I need to write. I need to write a book about how great strikes are.
I think you should. I think you should.
And then we could have health insurance.
When are we getting the health insurance? Let me know. As soon as you know, let me know.
I gotcha.
And maybe just a shout out to all the publishers back there who might want to start organizing as well.
Yeah, I did not know anything about unions or organizing or socialism until I went to grad school. And there are all these white people with petitions all of a sudden. And I was like, what is happening? But I've really come around. I love unions.
Okay, do you want to know something crazy? I'm a registered socialist and they've never called me for jury duty. It's like the ultimate hack. They don't want you on a jury.
Honestly,
they don't want to hear from you. You don't even go to the courthouse. I've never been to the courthouse.
You heard it here first.
Socialism kind of made some points. I mean, it must be said.
The girls were cooking with socialism.
So I wanna go back to the character Seamus that Brandon was reading about. That not terrible bro at all. He has a line, and it's clear you're making fun of him. But I would like to hear your response to his shitty saying. And then I would sort of like to hear your responses, too.
I'm so nervous.
What's she gonna say?
So keep in mind that Seamus is in a poetry MFA, so it's a little different. But Seamus says, it used to seem to him that you could write about the past as a way of understanding the present. But now his classmates wrote only about the present and its urgency. So as people who have written about the present, tell me your response.
Honestly, I think the last adult century was the 19th century, and that the 20th century was a century for babies, and modernity is whack. But I do, when I wrote that line, I was thinking about a lot of my own frustration and anxiety about writing what to me felt like the urgent questions of my own time, and the way that people would receive that is me writing these oh, you're writing about poets. You need to write about something real and something eternal. Why aren't you writing about big capital Q questions? And I'm like, people starving in the streets while trying to write poems is real. I don't, and I think, yeah, there's a real impulse in the culture to look at art that is about our contemporary moment as being basic or bad, or it's the same thing that happens with when people deride selfie culture or whatever. And so I had a lot of anxieties as someone who wants to write capital S serious books, and my subject is people in college towns, and am I writing serious literature? Am I writing something that's childish and narrow? And so yeah, in writing that I was trying to hope Seamus would come to an answer so that I could use it to soothe my own soul, and instead all I found were more questions.
I'm gonna defer to Brandon about Brandon's own work.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
I feel like that's the right thing to do.
Amen. I'm wondering, because we've talked a lot about dark stuff, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about hope both for your characters, if you're going to grant them hope, and hope for the readers who are consuming your work.
Okay, I'll start. I think just to jump off what I said earlier, with my character, she's hope is what I would call sort of a positive imagination. It's a way of trying to think about her own experience as being full of possibility rather than as being closed down to possibility. And it's really important to me that the book has a kind of sort of portrays the dialectic between those two things. As far as whether the book itself is hopeful, that's a real question for me. Some people have experienced it that way, and other people have experienced the opposite. It's actually been very interesting, sort of Rorschach testy, to see how people respond. And I think that for me, the most hopeful thing is the struggle itself. The fact that, by the end of the night, she's still neither side has won that.
Sure.
Because if either side's going to win it, it's probably going to be the dark side. So that is maybe the hope. Yeah.
I get this question a lot about the end of the book, which I won't spoil. I get my DMs all day. The girls are in the DMs being like, what does that mean? And I think it depends on the day, like whether I feel like it's a hopeful book or a tragic book, because some days I feel super hopeful and some days I feel super tragic. But in terms of hope for the reader, I don't know. Now that I'm kind of winding down from book tour and I'm back to my real life, like sometimes I get to walk my dog and it's a nice day and no one's being mean to me. And I'm like, oh, this is a good day. And then I'm like, the bar is in hell. But yeah, I mean, I think I wrote the book to be ambiguous on purpose because I do think it really depends on the day of the week how hopeful or doomed I'm feeling. I think that's true for most of us too.
Yeah. I think with this book and the first two books, I was really, my main focus was like representing like life as I felt it and lived it, and I don't know that hope entered into it because I don't think I had that function yet installed in my writer brain. Like the idea of like projecting into the future like did not occur to me. And now as I'm writing, now having like lived life and grown up and become hopefully a more skilled writer, now the sort of ambition of my work has broadened to sort of imagine a future and to not just be, I guess, concerned with capturing life as it's happening to me now and sort of getting the intricacies of daily life right, but to sort of ask broader and deeper questions about like what world would I like to see, and could I sort of find a way to scooch these characters closer to that? And so I think, yeah, I do detect in my own work a sort of opening up instead of a very foreclosed horizon of possibility. My work feels more open to me, and that openness feels like a kind of hope.
I love that. We are going to take a couple questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please come up to the microphone up here. I mean, that is, yeah, it's pretty central. So I can keep talking, and you percolate, you think about it.
Yes, Lincoln was telling me about that.
Tell me about writing satire of present day.
I don't think we ever think it's satire.
No.
I just thought I was writing. But I mean, I did want to say something about the present moment and books. And if it's okay, I'm going to talk about Roe v. Wade really quick. Don't be mad. I don't know who's out there that's going to yell at me about this. But it's very hard to write the present because I wrote this and sold it before anything happened with Roe. And it is definitely like a pro-choice book. But by the time it went to print, it suddenly meant a lot more to me. And so I do think it's very unwieldy to write about the present because things can just change so quickly. Like when I first wrote the book, I was like, wow, you're so edgy. And now I'm like, that actually matters and means a lot. And so it is very unwieldy to write about the present and really hard because context changes so quickly.
Yeah.
And like things are deemed terrible or overturned or signed into law like before you even get to the printer. And so I don't know if anybody else on this panel feels this way, but sometimes a lot of my anxiety and dread is that like things are going to change so drastically by the time the thing gets on the shelf that I'm going to look like a total fuckface.
Are you referring to the fact that it takes months and months to publish a book?
I mean,
not years?
It's years. Yeah, it's years.
Yeah. And like in that time, the entire world is different. I mean, look at Trump. Like, we had all these like really great, wonderful, bright-sided, bright-covered, pro-feminist books that were bought before Trump got elected. And then Trump got elected, and we were publishing all these optimistic books about what the future's gonna hold. And it's like, oh dear, oh no, yikes. And so, I mean, overnight the world changes. And so, yeah, it is dangerous to write about the moment.
Yeah, somebody was like, do you plan your books to like, and I'm like, there's no point in even attempting to do that because you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I was in the middle of drafting a book when the pandemic happened, and suddenly all those dinner parties needed to change because they were gone. They were.
You're also suddenly, you're like, dinner parties kind of don't matter the same way they used to.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
I'll just add, and it actually ties back to the question you asked earlier about the present. I was just thinking about that. It seems like the difference between writing about the past and the present is that we think we know what the past means. We already have a sort of a an established story of what the past is, and the present we haven't established what the story of the present is. Obviously, the sort of established story of the past is not always accurate, and so we're retelling the past all the time. But there's an anxiety that comes with like not having the story already, not having and sort of engaging with the nebulousness, and you have to find the story in that. Maybe that's something.
Yeah.
I think we have a question, which I'm excited about because I do love questions.
Hi.
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 I'm curious about, this is a little bit more of like a writing craft question. All this talk about like capitalism and stuff and how we're in this not so optimistic place. I'm working on a story that deals with climate change. So I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts on like giving your character a satisfying ending, even if you're dealing with like these external topics that are quite bleak and aren't improving.
I'll go in because I'm a little bit related to you. Right before we sent the book to print, they found out new things about black holes. And so initially the end of the book felt very doomed and almost sort of like suicidal ideation. But through like the new discoveries, they determined there were also wormholes in there that could take you to another point in time. And suddenly that kind of blew it open to have a much more, there were a lot more options for how you read the ending. So I would say go back to the science, you know what I mean? Like just keep a really close eye on it, and eventually something will pop up that's not miserable, and that might be your hook. I mean, that's kind of the benefit of weaving science into it, is it's a living thing, right? We're figuring new things out every day. And so I'm sure there's someone out there that's telling us that if we stop vaping, the climate will be okay. But I'm still vaping.
I think your question gets at something a little larger, which is that I think it's very difficult to figure out how to end things now, because it's just something that's too coherent feels false. I mean, it probably always did, but it definitely does now. And so figuring out a way to have something that coheres without necessarily resolving, that's on my mind all the time.
Yeah, and I would say that for me that brings up this tension between the sort of like narrative drama and then the drama of setting and context. And whenever I'm in doubt, I always try to bring it back to the character. And I feel like the ingredients you need for a satisfying arc for your character are to be found in their trajectory. It's already there in the character. And to look for those coherences within the character's life and circumstance, and to look for ways to tie that meaningfully to your setting. Of course, it should have some interplay, but I would look to the character and not the sort of world for that.
Oh, also, something else someone brilliant told me, go back and reread your beginning, because you put your ending in your beginning and you just don't realize it. So go back and spend a lot more time there, and it's likely that you hid something there for yourself to use.
Yeah. We love an echo.
Thank you, guys.
Of
Yeah,
course.
anytime.
Thanks.
Who else has questions? We'll also do relationship advice.
Sarah Rose will do.
I don't have any relationship questions, but I want to ask about, you guys have been talking about modernity in mostly like events, and I want to ask what modern language kind of looks like to you, or how do you use language or word choice to express modernity? Is it very casual, or is it, what word usage are you trying to express with modernity?
Yes, should you name check Instagram in your book question? Yeah, I find that really challenging. Earlier in my life, I was like, no, books are books, and you should never have informal language in them. And I feel now I feel like my books reflect more the ways that we communicate. Like this book I'm working on now, there are emails, there are texts. I find the different registers of life to be finding ways to portray that in the text, which used to feel like an anxiety for me, now feels like a fun way to let some light and air into the book. And so I think, yeah, just looking at the ways that we use language today and letting that infiltrate in ways that are meaningful and interesting for me as an artist, and also for the lives of the characters. And so, yeah, I'm just, text, images, book, like reference, all that stuff.
I used to swear I would never put a text message in a book. I was like, I'll never fucking do it. And then it turns out you can't really have a plot if people don't have phones
So true.
anymore. It's you don't have a choice, because how's she gonna get a text from a man that messes her day up if she doesn't have a phone? You know, so in the beginning, I was exactly like you. I was like, I'm never going to say cell phone. I'm never going to say iPhone. I'm never going to say, you know, and I still try not to say brands or anything that'll really place it. But you have to get over it at some point, because it's how people are living, and you can't have a realistic plot if there's no technology and no one's communicating. Like, obviously, if I text Brandon, I'm not going to be like, good day, sir. And, like, you know, take on the form of, like, an old-timey letter that I would have sent by pony, you know? And so you just have to go with reality, I guess, especially if you're gonna deal with the present day. That's how we're rolling, you know?
I think one thing I was really interested in was taking that anxiety about using too much topical language or too many, and taking it and flipping it and actually having that be the thing I wanted to do. And one of the things I ended up doing was writing about papers and articles and stuff by living people. So I have a fictional conversation of real writers and scholars. And that's kind of weird, actually. It's a little unsettling, I think, to be reading someone's opinions about an economist who's writing right now. It felt a little bit like, almost like an alienating kind of dissonant quality in the work itself. Yeah. And I loved that. I thought that was actually, as someone who would have avoided that before, to actually take it the opposite direction was really fun.
I think we have time for one more. If anybody, yes, please.
The man on the skateboard is having the best day
I
ever.
was so jealous.
I was
of
like,
him.
get me off this stage. I'm going with him.
I was expecting him to come here and ask you a question. But,
If he would have done a sick kickflip and asked a question, that would have been really nice.
I actually had two questions.
Okay.
So first one was, given all this heavy talk of late capitalism and you talk about fates and such, I mean, do you find it hard for your characters to have agency of power? Like, how do you kind of give them some sense of propulsion in your stories? And then the second question was kind of a relationship one. What advice would you give to younger people, like people at high school and stuff? You know, I have kids, so I'm always thinking of parenting tips.
Like dating advice for high schoolers? That's above my pay grade. I don't even know how they're dating. They're probably using TikTok to talk to each other. I don't know. I'm too old.
Yes,
You know what? Date someone who actually is nice to you. That's actually, it's pretty simple. Date someone who's nice to you and wants to date you also.
Man, I also
Where
feel,
were you in my 20s?
It's actually so simple, and we make it so complicated. Just date someone who's nice to you.
yeah, but like that's not fun. Anyway,
I think it can be. I think it can be. I'm trying. My therapist is making me do it.
I think there's nothing worse than a man being nice to you. Like,
If you're mean to me,
oh, you
stay
like
out
me?
away from me.
But to the question of agency, which feels related somehow.
It is.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think what made many of my works feel so foreclosed before is that I did not believe that we have agency. I think like that is a modern lie. We do not. We grow up certain ways. We grow up under certain conditions, and things happen to us, and those things shape and influence how we are. And every action that we make is really just an output of several inputs, and it's all just widgets. And now I'm trying to believe that isn't so true, and we can make choices. And even if those choices we make are outputs of inputs several leagues above us, even if that is true, then in the moment at least I feel like I am making a choice. And who cares if free will is an illusion? I mean, that's what the Calvinists were talking about. Like, it's fine. We will live. We will deal with it. But yeah, I mean, I think that the millennial novel, as it exists, is primarily an extension of the naturalist novel, which is very much this idea that all of life is predetermined and that society is just a closed system and we're all just on these little tracks and everything is an illusion. Yeah, it's all fake.
Natasha Lyonne said something in the New Yorker profile a couple months ago about how a trauma response is probably overriding your free will, and asked if you've been traumatized, do you no longer have free will because your initial response is, and I was like, I gotta shut this. I can't think about it. It's too much. So I just want you also to have to think about it. It's like The Ring. Like, now you've seen it, so good luck with that. What was the question, though?
I think I've forgotten now. So no,
It
the
was
question was, I mean,
agency.
do you find it hard to give your characters agency and power?
I do think if you to roast my ass in a book review, you could say my character has no agency and that things just happen to her. But I also do think that is what capitalism is doing often. And so I do struggle with that because a lot of times she is at the mercy of the world around her. And that makes her kind of weak and shitty. You know, she needs to go to therapy and get her life together and start making some decisions.
I'm so sorry to cut this off.
Oh
you
my
will have
God.
to. I know. I'm so sorry.
Tell your kids to text me.
Yeah. Thank you to Martin
Thanks
and Sarah
for coming, guys.
and Brandon.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys.
And so the authors will start signing books at the table right over there.
Like you're done.